Revolution. Cenk Uygur, Kara Eastman with me today. Kara's a lot of things at TYT, including our community director. She also ran for office as a Democrat in Nebraska too a couple of times. That's gonna be relevant to the interview we're gonna do today, because we're gonna talk to Evan Barker. She was a Democratic operative and now has left the party in quite spectacular fashion, in a little bit controversial way. But she was a fundraiser for progressive politicians and organizations, including PCCC, Left Rising. She was an intern for Barack Obama's first presidential campaign, field organizer for Hillary Clinton, but then also worked for progressives as well. She raised at least $50 million for the left, which is a lot of money. And now she's got a book out called Nothing Left: Confessions of a Democratic Operative, and it's a New York Times bestseller, and we're curious about her thoughts about that, including some of the things she wrote about Kara's race, which is really interesting in Nebraska. So Evan, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much, Cenk and Kara, for having me on. It is amazing to see you guys after such a long time. I haven't seen you, I think, since the DNC in 2024, and you are the first characters from my book that have interviewed me about my book, so it's especially special. Thank you.
Okay, no problem, Evan. So let's dive in. So first off, give us a broad sense of why you got so frustrated with the Democratic Party and decided to leave.
Yeah, so it was a slow disillusionment over time. I started out in Democratic politics in 2008, as you said. Part of what drew me to working in Democratic politics is because I was born with a rare pre-existing health condition, similar to cystic fibrosis, called primary ciliary dyskinesia. I know that's a mouthful. And as a child, I struggled to get health insurance. I didn't always have it. Sometimes my parents were not able to afford high-risk plans. My mom's employment was often rocky, and that kind of woke me up to the horrors of the American healthcare system at a much younger age than most people, I would say. And I was really scared of graduating high school. I didn't know how I was gonna get insurance. I thought I needed to go, try to get a job at a corporation if I could get one, to get coverage. And so I got really activated really young by Barack Obama's promise of universal health care. And he didn't quite deliver that, but he did make it so that I could get insurance, which was really, really massive. And so I kind of got hooked in politics pretty young. During college, I checked out a little bit. It was kind of just doing the college thing. I was working through college. I'm a first generation college student. I went to school on Pell Grants and Loans and also waitressed. And then after Donald Trump was elected, I got reactivated. I did briefly work for Hillary Clinton in between there in Kansas, but I got reactivated and I ended up moving to the East Coast to get away from the Midwest. I thought I wanted to get away from all the people in my family that had been lifelong Democrats and had switched and voted for Donald Trump in 2016. So I ended up on the East Coast and I worked for this establishment politician who was pretty awful. And just kind of got more disillusioned. Her husband was involved in the financial crisis, Cenk, and they owned 3 homes in America. And he would spend his days dressed up as a magician, and she was just self-funding, and it was just sort of a very disillusioning experience. And I guess he was a magician, right? He made people's houses disappear. And ended up moving back home, back to Kansas, and found your friend Brent Welder's campaign. And I was extremely happy about finding Brent's campaign. I was a little late to the Bernie game, which I was reminded of frequently by some of the Bernie people that I would meet on that campaign. But I was really inspired, and I was quickly converted to their ways of thinking. And it seemed that Bernie wanted to guarantee me health care. It didn't matter if I moved across state lines. He wanted to get money out of politics, which I felt very disillusioned by as a fundraiser, which I talk about in the book, the process of call time and the reality of that. To my surprise, not a lot of people really know what it's like, fundraising behind the scenes. And then, from there ended up working in in the national progressive landscape. Worked for a fundraising firm out of DC that, their clients included like Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, Ilhan Omar, Jasmine Crockett, Abdul El Sayed, a bunch of, really prominent progressive names. And kind of figured out around 2020, 2021 that the progressive movement had changed a lot. It wasn't the same movement that I found when I started working with Brent and was inspired by Bernie. It went from being a class-based movement that was focused on economic issues, in my view, to being focused more on identity politics and luxury beliefs. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so Evan, let me jump in there because I get being disillusioned with the establishment Democrats. That's easy and obvious, right? And what you describe about like these like elites that are politicians, and yeah, that sounds exactly right?
Yeah.
So you get to the progressive world. There, I feel like, okay, now you're going to make a home there because you got into it for healthcare and they mean it, and they're actually for money out of politics. So Brent Welder's a great candidate, was a just Democrat.
He's
like
a great
Carl
guy.
Was. So now, if the folks at home don't know, you go all the way to Trump eventually at the end of this journey.
Yeah, I did.
But the part that I'm most curious about in the journey is not the part where you get disgruntled with the Democratic Party and leadership and politicians, but the part where you get disgruntled with progressives and go all the way to Trump. So what was it about what you're calling the identity politics or culture war issues that turned you off so much?
Well, every day just turned into a struggle session inside of progressive campaigns. And I think it's still happening because I've gotten a lot of messages actually from people that work in progressive campaigns. But, for example, I was working for a Justice Democrats back candidate that was running in Chicago. And because I suggested that she call a different donor list, and I suggested this to her on the day of the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict, I was kicked off the campaign because she was a Black woman, and I should have known better than to do my job on the day of the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict.
Wait, why is that relevant? Why is the Rittenhouse verdict relevant?
Well, I didn't understand. That's a good question. I didn't understand it either. But I was told that wasn't a good day to tell her, to give her feedback on fundraising because I'm white and she was Black, and I shouldn't have been giving her any feedback that day. I should have been more culturally sensitive to her feelings.
Yeah, okay.
So stuff like this just kept happening. It was like a constant, like this wasn't just an isolated incident. It was like a constant thing every single day about. And I felt like the movement shifted from Bernie's original vision to becoming very toxic and identity obsessed.
So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, and then I'll let Cara come in here because we've got so many details to ask you about and stuff. But so. Look, Evan, I'm super frustrated by the identity politics as well. But I stayed because the economic populism and money out of politics is the only route. And I agree. And the progressive / populist policies are excellent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I ignore the cultural war stuff and try to get material things passed on behalf of the American people. Why go all the way to Trump? I mean, don't you know Trump's a lunatic?
Yeah, of course. So hold on, before I go to I'll address Trump, but before I go there, I agree with you. I write in my book that I think the way forward for Democrats is to focus on economic populism and couple that with cultural and social moderation. And I think part of my frustration, Cenk, is that the people that I worked with would never agree to that. Like they will not do the economic populism stuff without all of this other craziness. Like, it's just like, you might feel this way. You're in media, right? You're not on campaigns. You're not inside of that world. And it's very different when you're actually inside of these organizations and inside of these campaigns. And so to me, I would talk to my family members in the Midwest who had been lifelong Democrats, many of whom supported Bernie when he was running against Hillary Clinton, and did the same thing as me and ended up voting for Donald Trump, and have continued to vote for Donald Trump since then. And so I just don't think that they could ever get to the economic populism stuff without having a perspective shift on these other issues. And so I want to address that. Secondly, and I also think that the economic populism during those years, and maybe even still today, is being put on the back burner. To your point about Donald Trump, it was a protest vote, partially. That was a big part of it. It was like, what is the one thing that I can do that will really shock and piss off everybody that I used to know? And that was Donald Trump. And the other issue, and you may not like it, you may not morally agree with it. That's okay, that's fine. I'm fine with being judged. That's okay. A lot of people have told me how they feel about it. It's totally fine. The other thing is that every election, we are presented with options, and when people vote in that election, they decide what is most important to them in that moment. And in that election, instead of thinking about healthcare or the social safety net, I decided to vote for the side that I knew didn't hate my white son.
Okay.
And that is what happened, and that's the other part of it. And then also, Donald Trump, his campaign promises were quite different than how he's governed. So, and I liked the tariffs policies, and I liked the talking about bringing jobs back and closing the border and all of those things.
So Evan, this is not a gotcha question. I'm genuinely curious. I'm not asking you if you regret not voting for Kamala Harris. That's
no, I don't.
No, I know. That's a weird gotcha question, but
that's fine.
But the genuine question is, yes, but given what Trump has done, do you regret voting for him?
Well, I don't regret voting for I don't regret voting for Joe Biden. I don't regret voting for Donald Trump. I don't regret working for progressives, even though I think they've done a lot of bad things. People do what they do at the time with the information that they had. If the question is, would I vote for him today? The answer is no. But I don't regret anything, no.
Okay, interesting. Cara.
Yeah, so Evan, you obviously worked on my campaign. It's part of the reason I was super excited to have you on the show. And we've stayed in contact. But I remember when you did vote for Donald Trump, you texted me and said you thought you had done something that I was gonna hate you for.
Yeah, because most people did.
Yeah, and so I'm curious about that because I obviously don't hate you, and I loved working with you. And I don't think you're talking about me necessarily when you're talking about progressives in general. And if you are, that's fine too.
No, I'm not.
But what was that feedback from others and people around you like?
Well, my son was denied entry to preschool in San Francisco because of my vote. It was passed around in mom's chats. He stopped getting invited to birthday parties. I don't like to focus on that stuff because it's like, I don't want to be painted as a victim. I'm not a victim. I made the decision that I made, right? And I expected blowback. But yeah, it was, most of the people that I used to know don't speak to me naturally. A few people do, you do, some other people who I will not mention because I don't want to piss off anybody out there that might be watching that knows them and would get mad at them for talking to me. But there are a few people that I still talk to in the progressive movement because they might dislike my decision, but they like me as a person. And yeah, so it was not a very great experience doing that. But I just want to say I'm really grateful that you guys are having me on today because I think that with writing this book, I wanted to inspire change in the progressive movement and in the Democratic Party. And I think that most of the people out there aren't really interested in speaking to me because of who I voted for. And I think that's kind of a shame because I think that people should, like Democrats and progressives, should be speaking to Trump voters probably before anybody else if they want to be able to move forward and rebuild their party.
Yeah, I mean,
so I give you a lot of credit.
Thank you. And of course, many others say, no, you shouldn't talk to Trump people. When Mamdani does, that's terrific. When AOC super late in the game does, that's terrific. But when we do, that's of course a high moral crime. But I wanted to go back to some of the terrible things about the Democratic Party, which we do agree on. And then I'll come back to what we think is going to be the right path forward. But you wrote about Kara's race a little bit and what Democratic leaders in Nebraska did behind the scenes. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, of course. So I visited Kara's race. I don't even know how many times. It was a lot. I think I was always popping in and out, right? Adam was always sending me there. And I think it was about a month before the election, maybe 3 weeks before the election. I have very detailed notes. I should have reviewed them before I came on. But I found out from her team that the Nebraska Democratic Party, the state party, had cut her campaign off from the voter file ban, which was extremely shocking to me, Cenk.
Us too.
I could not really believe it, actually. It was like she was running in it was about a month before the election. She's running against a Republican, and the Democrats are sabotaging her. And that was one of the things that really actually connected me to the progressive movement. I feel like I've always kind of been an outsider. I'm sort of like always for the underdog. The anti-establishment appeals to me. And it just really, really pissed me off to see her get treated that way. And I remember I reached out to the DNC. Like, I personally had a call with the DNC to see if they could help get it restored. The campaign was talking to the DCCC, and just nobody really seemed interested in helping at all. And I think her campaign went without access. This is critical campaign software. Like the van, for anybody that's out there watching that has worked on a campaign, you know how important van is. You cannot knock doors in the final few weeks. You can't make phone calls. You can't send text messages. Like, it is a critical piece of campaign software. And so for them to cut her off like that, and we all know that field can swing an election by a couple of points on average. They say up to 3 points. She lost by 1.9.
Yeah. So, Kara, look, I know the established Democrat in your race then eventually did an ad for the Republicans. So it's not like Democratic leadership in Nebraska wasn't trying to torpedo you in every way. And like, for the people at home that might be shocked by that, there's two wings in the Democratic Party. The establishment Democrats are vicious, and they would much rather have a progressive lose to a Republican, because then they can maintain their control within the party. And they can go and tell every cable news anchor, you see that the progressives lose, we're the more electable ones. Make sure that they're all destroyed in the primaries, etc. So, but what was the excuse they gave you for not allowing you to have access to van?
I have no idea. I mean, there wasn't really an excuse. It was a back and forth between my campaign managers and the state party chair. And there wasn't ever like a good reason for it. It was just like, we cut off your access, something about a technicality or who knows. It wasn't because we didn't pay. We were always good about that kind of stuff. But I mean, to be honest, and I haven't really talked about this much, but the state party chair, who remains the state party chair today and now also works for the DNC, was sabotaging my campaign the whole time. I mean, so this was just one part that Evan was witness to. But I mean, the minute I went to, Evan was talking about Adam Green from the PCCC. I went to a PCCC event and she called the PCCC basically saying I shouldn't be there. She was constantly like interfering in the campaign for whatever reason.
So, Evan, did you get a sense of why they wanted Kara to lose and did this extraordinary thing of pulling van from her right before the election against the Republican?
Well, I think back then everyone was really freaked out about AOC winning, right? And there was a bunch of things that the establishment tried to do at that time to try to stop the momentum of the progressive left. There was also a blacklist. I was blacklisted for a while, Cenk. My firm was blacklisted. My resume was permanently tainted. And I think that in this case, like, it was better, I write this in my book, it was better to lose to a Republican than have a Bernie candidate win. And I think, when Kara was running in 2018, the progressive movement was still economics forward. Her campaign focused on affordability and healthcare. There wasn't all of this other stuff in there. And so I think at that time, that was the reason. It was like a power struggle between the populist and the corporate-backed establishment. And that's why I wanted to put it in there. And other things in my book, I don't know if you guys want to move to this, but there's other examples in my book that I gave as well of other candidates that I worked with that cycle and the next cycle that experienced similar things.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Andrew Romanoff is a great example. He ran for US Senate in Colorado, and he was a progressive, but Colorado leans blue. So it's not like he was running in Ohio or something, right? And he was running on a progressive platform. And I think you actually made some calls for him, so thank you, Cenk. Basically, they did in that instance, it was interesting. It wasn't the establishment. The establishment was directly fighting him, but it was actually progressives. Maybe this is spicy to say on TYT, I don't know. But Bernie Sanders did not endorse him. I was told it was because he was close with Chuck Schumer, and Chuck Schumer asked him not to. And Elizabeth Warren actually endorsed the corporate back guy, the John Hickenlooper, who's now a senator there. And that was completely wild. That I went from like being the establishment that was sabotaging the progressives to the progressives sabotaging each other. And it's interesting because we can't say that they weren't endorsing in US Senate races, because that's around the same time they both endorsed Charles Booker, who was running against Mitch McConnell in Kentucky. And I was told that they did that because they knew that race wasn't winnable. So the establishment was okay with Bernie and Warren backing a candidate where they knew he couldn't win. But to do that in a blue state, Andrew could actually win, and it would have caused all hell to break loose in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and you could even argue that Colorado's purple, and so if a progressive like Romanoff won in a purple state, that would be the worst case scenario for the establishment, Democrats. And so I get that, and yeah, I did help Andrew behind the scenes, and he did often say that we were among the few.
You were.
And yeah, and Bernie does have a couple of Achilles heels, and one of them is he listens way too much to Schumer and Biden and all those guys in the Senate. He still makes the mistake of thinking they're his friends when they view him as a mortal enemy. He just doesn't know that, and it's sad. And a lot of these progressives get left behind nowadays. Of course, AOC is famous for leaving behind the progressive challenges to her beloved colleagues. So that's happened. But one more, Evan, and then I want to get back to the future. Any other stories of treachery behind the scenes?
Yeah, there was another race in Texas, Cristina Sensen Ramirez, and there was a poll that came out that showed that she was leading against the establishment Schumer pick, MJ Hagar. And she'd only been in the race for like 4 or 5 weeks, and I raised her $500,000 really quickly. And so she suddenly became a viable candidate to them. And on the final day of the filing deadline, a mysterious woman entered the race named Annie Mama Garcia. And at the time, we thought that she was probably recruited or something to try to split the Latino vote. And it ended up being, I found out years later from the head of the DSCC's girlfriend that that's exactly what happened, that they recruited her to run against Cristina, and she ended up getting 10% of the vote, and Cristina got 13%, and then I think the MJ got like 20% or something like that. But it would have been that if Annie weren't on the ballot, more than likely Cristina probably would have been in the runoff against MJ.
Yeah, it is amazing. I almost wish that you hadn't voted for Trump just so that they couldn't dismiss your book. to be honest, right?
Or maybe if you kind of wish that I hadn't told anyone I voted for Trump.
Well, no, I wish you hadn't voted for Trump because that is a disastrous vote.
Why would they dismiss like so many people voted for Trump in 2024? I mean, a lot of people did exactly what I did. They were so fed up with the state of the Democratic Party that they, out of desperation, wanted to send a signal. Like, I know many people who did that.
I know that. I know that. But you've told really important stories here about the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
But once you vote for Trump, no Democrat will ever listen to you, other than us, because we're crazy open-minded, and then we'll get attacked. Don't even listen. Don't talk, don't listen, don't do anything, don't be intellectually curious, don't find out anything that's wrong. I mean, it's so funny because on the left, we make fun of the Republicans for saying like, oh, love it or leave it, man, about the country, right? Oh, if you say anything wrong about Trump or the country, that means you're a traitor and you should leave the country. But then Democratic leadership and the media does the same thing about the Democratic Party. Love it or leave it, don't criticize it, otherwise you should leave. Anyways, Cara.
Your audience might hate me I think Trump's really funny, so at least I have that. Yeah,
I mean,
he's funny. You can't admit that. You don't think he's funny sometimes?
No.
Jake, what about you? Come on.
Anna and I have talked about this a lot. He's unintentionally funny. He doesn't mean to be. In fact, I literally did an analysis of, I think it was the Alfred Smith thing or whatever, one of those black tie things that he did. Every joke he had felt completely flat, but when he was riffing between the jokes and he was saying totally absurd things, everybody was laughing their ass off. He's unintentionally funny because he says ridiculous things. So, but anyways, Cara.
Well, hold on. I just want to say one thing. Sorry, Cara. There's one really cool thing. I know the Democrats are dismissing me, Cenk, but I am getting tons of messages from staffers inside the party right now that are telling me that they are secretly reading my book. And I got a message from a consultant today who owns a firm, not gonna say his name, but he said he's making it required reading for his staff. So maybe there will be a quiet.
Why do they want to hear about how evil they are? But okay, fascinating.
Because he agrees with me. He's like, a lot of Democrats agree with me privately behind the scenes, but they're just afraid to say it. You have to leave to be able to say it, or you have to be like you and have like a platform and be independent, right?
Yeah, we hear a lot about the Bernie Trump voters, but I don't think that anybody, I don't feel like we've really done a deep dive on what that means. And we talked to all those people when we were able to knock doors, when they weren't revoking our van access, which we knocked 200,000 doors in 2018. So it was a lot of people. I met a ton of Bernie Trump people, and really tried to understand what that meant. And so I think that that's why there's an open mind here to be able to say, okay, look, no, I don't think Trump's funny. I think he's horrible. But I understand to some extent what you did. I don't hate you for what you did. I'm glad you wrote this book. I think it's fantastic. It's very brave to do. And I'm curious, what are there things that people are telling you that they learned that they had no idea about?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the sabotage. The coolest message I got was from this person that wrote me on a burner account. I don't know if it was a man or a woman, but they wrote to me and said that they were watching one of my live streams and that they sat down and they read my book in one sitting and one night. And by the end of it, they sighed the biggest sigh of relief they think they've ever sighed, knowing that they weren't batshit insane. And that what happened to me is happening to them and is still happening in the party. It is extremely toxic. When you're a candidate or when you're in media, you can't really understand what it's like inside of these campaigns and the decisions that are made and just how fundamentally out of touch progressives and Democrats are about so many issues critical to working class people. And go ahead.
So Evan, you mentioned so all your critique of the Democratic Party is incredibly believable, right? And it's things that maybe some of the specifics we haven't covered. I didn't know some of those Romanoff stories. I didn't even know the story from your perspective, at least, about what happened to Cara on Van and in her race in particular, right? So that's why it's really edifying and interesting to see that, get that insider's perspective. But overall, I know all of the ills of the Democratic Party and leadership, right? And the politicians. So when it comes to progressives though, I understand some of your frustration, and we've talked about it on the show, and we've taken a lot of heat for talking about it. But I want to understand what mattered more to you, right? Because you mentioned two different things here in terms of your disgruntlement with progressives in particular, or the movement, progressive movement in particular. One is the identity politics stuff, and you said, like, I don't want to vote for people who hate my son, and so that was a very strong comment. I don't know if you think, like, I think the culture wars are to divide us and are a distraction, and I think we fall into that trap, and I think that it has some excesses, but I don't know that anyone hates your white son, right? But that's what you said, so I'm curious.
That's how it felt.
That's why I'm asking you, right?
Yeah,
and how
that's
much,
truly how it felt.
How much of you getting disgruntled was that, as opposed to the treachery behind the scenes and the witch hunt? Right, the witch hunt of, if everyone doesn't agree 100% with something, then they're a right winger and they have to be driven and they have to shut up and they can't talk on Kyle Rittenhouse Day or whatever, right? And so, which of those two mattered more to you think?
Well, I mean, I could have constructive conversations generally with people about policy prioritization. For instance, around 2021, I would talk to people that I worked with about defund the police, because David Shore, this pollster, had released some polling data and ended up getting fired that showed that defund the police wasn't a popular thing to run on. And so I would talk to them about that, or I would try to explain that, like, Green New Deal was very alienating to my blue collar family members, or that wiping all college debt was very alienating to my uncles, who actually explicitly said to me, and they're lifelong Democrats, right? I paid my union dues my entire freaking life. Why should my tax dollars go to wiping all of the student debt for all of these college kids that are gonna make 2 to 3 times as much in their life as I will as a bricklayer? And so, there was these policies, and I would be able to have sometimes pretty constructive conversations. They would usually tell me I was wrong, or they would explain that it didn't matter if something like the Green New Deal wasn't popular, or if it were alienating people, because their jobs as progressive operatives were not to lead with what was popular, but instead was to shift public opinion over time, which I think is just a horrible strategy. Like in general in politics. And I think that is kind of like the attitude of the progressive left. But then on top of that, on top of them championing these issues, that I would go home and like talk to my family members and realize how alienating it was to them. There was all of this nonsense like behind the scenes. For instance, George Soros's organization put out a directive that for 5 years, they were only going to fund organizations led by non-white people. I saw people, I'm not gonna say who, maybe one of them's right on this call, I don't know. I saw people that were passed over for jobs, and policies like this rippled throughout the Democratic Party and the progressive movement and in the establishment.
Yeah.
And daily in Zoom calls, I would hear the denigration of men. I would hear people make comments like, "Oh, that mediocre white man," like while white men were on the call. I would hear them say that men need to be bullied in school more so that they would grow up with less confidence. I would see women that weaponized Me Too politics to their advantage. I had women that tried to pressure me into saying that people sexually harass me that I don't feel like ever sexually harassed me, Cenk. There was like a constant thing every single day. It was very discriminatory. And so yes, by the end of that experience, I absolutely felt like the people that I was surrounded by in the greater movement. I'm not talking about my direct colleagues at the firm I worked with. I liked them a lot, and I said that in the book. But in the greater movement, would not like my white son when he grew up. Maybe as a baby they loved him, but when he grew up, he would be public enemy number one. And I think that the progressive movement went from being a beautiful movement about 2016, taking on Wall Street, breaking up monopolies, fighting for universal health care, to a movement that had the goal of hating anybody that wasn't oppressed or marginalized enough. And that is what I experienced every single day. And I talk about it in chapter 12 of my book, Fragile White Woman.
Yeah.
And it absolutely made me insane. And it made a lot of people go insane. It wasn't just people in democratic politics. It was people out in the real world too.
So I'm gonna challenge our audience here to keep an open mind, because so sometimes we'll talk to an Israeli supporter and I'll tell them all the things that Israel's doing wrong. And they'll think, no, that can't be true. It's never happened to me. It's not in my experience. Yeah, because you support Israel, so they would never attack you. But if you criticize Israel, they rip your face off, right? Just because it didn't happen to you doesn't mean it didn't happen. And I'm cautioning our audience to be careful not to do that when Evan's telling you stories that actually happened to her, right? You could disagree with her decision to vote for Trump. I do. I disagree with it, right? But I'll back you up on that, Evan. Things like that did happen, okay? And so don't tell us it didn't happen when it happened to us, right? So now I'm not white, I think, okay? Like I don't really care what race I am, and people have disagreements over it. But yeah, somebody in the progressive movement told others that I wasn't brown enough. I literally don't know what that means. And it's such an insane statement to make, but things like that were affecting people. And did I hear like normal masculinity being called toxic masculinity all the time to cut down men who they didn't agree with? Yeah. There is real toxic masculinity, right? That's you beat your wife and blah, blah, blah. There's a million other ways to you denigrate women, etc. Then there's normal, confident masculinity that isn't toxic at all. But there was no distinction ever made. And in fact, the lines were blurred oftentimes. But if you ever said it in public, they take your head off, right? And so, and then the witch hunt would ensue. Are you a secret right winger, secret Trump voter? So that's why so I'll end on, I think I'll end on this, although there's one other thing I wanted to ask, but Evan, look, so what do you think is the right path forward? Because I know the answer isn't Trump. The answer isn't what remains of MAGA.
Well, I say that at the end of my book.
Yeah, the answer isn't the Republican Party. So now what do you think is the?
So at this point, I'm partyless, I'm movementless. I don't care which party is in power, guys. I would like to influence both parties to be a real party of working class people. And that's what I say in my book. As far as Democrats, I give Republicans advice in the final chapter. Democrats in the chapter that's called The Autopsy, I think that you guys need a perspective shift on culture and social issues. I think that the answer for the left has always been, well, we can't really talk about identity politics or pronouns or defund the police, although maybe that's kind of shifted a little bit with Zoran, or abolishing ICE or any of this, immigration. Like we can't talk about those things because it would piss off our base. So instead, we're just gonna go far to the left on economics, which to his credit, Joe Biden did a great job with the CHIPS Act in doing an industrial investment in the United States. And I write that in my book. That's one of my favorite things about his presidency. But guess what? In 2024, the working class of this country still rejected the Democratic Party, even though he did that. And so to me, that should be the biggest freaking signal that culture and social issues matter to working class people. And I think that, I don't want to say moderate, because I know that that might leave a bad taste in people's mouths, or that it feels like a concession, but I think there needs to be a perspective shift. And I think it's hard to do, Cenk, because most of the people in the progressive movement and democratic politics, and I'm sure it's like this to some degree on the right too. This doesn't just extend to the Democratic Party, but they don't come from backgrounds like mine. And it's hard for them to see outside of themselves, and it's hard for them to see outside of these blue cities that they're in. So I would like the progressive to get it together. I would like for the Democratic Party to get it together. I have real skin in the game, guys. You can write me off for my vote, that's fine. I have a rare genetic disease that will most likely at some point cause me to get a double lung transplant. And if my husband ever loses his job, I can't use Obamacare in California to see my doctor. They don't take it. And so I would like the Democratic Party to be able to do things like universal health care. But I really don't think you're ever gonna be able to get people and my family on board, and not just working class white people, but working class people, Latinos, Black men as well, without moderating or having a perspective shift on a lot of these key culture issues. So that's the main message of my book.
Evan, you know that no Republican would ever give you that health care, right? That the only people who would are populist progressives.
I mean, I have talked to Republicans about it, and some of them seem open-minded. So I would.
No, I don't mean voters. I think their voters can be open-minded, and a lot of them will vote with us, and that's why Medicare for All polls at 65%, because it includes a lot of Republican voters and a ton of independents. But the politicians, they work for big pharma and big insurance, no question, 100%.
Well, Jake, that's the reason that I didn't switch my party affiliation, is because that's why I'm an independent. I never did a 180 and became a Republican overnight. I can't, and I say this to them. I'm very transparent about it. I'm not a Republican because I have economic disagreements with you guys. So, yeah.
Okay.
Well, and Cenk, you may have said this once or maybe twice, that if we don't get money out of politics, none of this happens. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yes. We'll never get any of this passed if we don't get money out of politics, because whether they're corporate Democrats or corporate Republicans, they work for corporate donors and a foreign government.
Right.
And I don't have to name the foreign government, you all know it.
The Ukraine?
Well, a little bit of them too, but obviously Nicaragua. No, Israel. Okay, last thing's an epilogue. So we talked about the parties and the movements, etc. But I did want to, before we left, you raised $50 million for the Democrats. So a lot of people have no idea how fundraising works and how you raise that kind of money. So how do you raise $50 million?
Yeah, it's not from knowing rich people, I can promise you that. It is, I don't know a lot of rich people, guys. So it is, it's just hard work, Cenk. It's like hardcore sales. It's like being a loan shark. That's what it's like. I have a chapter in my book called Always Be Closing, and it's basically a how-to guide on how to do call time. And usually the candidate will have, if you were running for office, I would first Rolodex you. I'd pull every single person out of your phone. We'd sit down together and we'd extract and we'd assign all of them numbers. And then we'd hit them up for money. And I would tell you to make the hard ask. And if you didn't want to make the hard ask, I'd keep reminding you, and I'd make you ask 3 times on the phone before you hung up. And then I'd get their money while you're still sitting on the phone. Okay. And then after we've kind of plundered through all of your personal contacts, we go to cold leads. And so literally politicians just spend 8-9 hours a day. That's what they're supposed to be doing anyway, just dialing for dollars and calling people all day long. And begging rich people. And actually, it's really sad. I put this in my book, and an article just came out about it today. Often elderly, lonely people too, that will answer their phones and aren't very technologically savvy and end up giving way too much to politicians. And just begging them for money over the phone. And it is a never-ending cycle. And I think a lot of politicians think that once they are out of, or once they've won their race, that this will end. But it does not end. It just keeps going, and it just keeps going. And I think Republicans and Democrats hate it. I think a lot of donors hate it. Of course, some love it because it gives them access. But that is the reality of what our politicians are doing. And then at night, they go to fundraisers.
That's great. It really inspires a lot of confidence in our system.
It's a great system. It's a great system. Yeah, my family loved it. They love getting calls from me. My uncle actually turned me down. My uncle, who was like working class, it was just like, he's like, I'm not giving you a dime because I think the whole thing sucks. I was like, Uncle Jimmy, I kind of get it. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, as Evan writes about, a lot of the system does suck. And that's why we've got to get money out of politics. We've got to end the corruption and bring back a functioning democracy, no matter where you are on the political spectrum. All right, Evan Barker, the book is called Nothing Left, Confessions of a Democratic Operative, currently a New York Times bestseller. Thank you for joining us, Evan, appreciate it.
Thanks, Cenk and Kara. Good to see you guys again after so many years.
All right, good to see you.
Bye.
All right. Guys, I'm actually gonna come back and do a bonus episode for you because a lot of you wrote in, including about this interview, and I wanted to share my thoughts about it as well. So good time to become a member. Hit the join button below on YouTube or tyt.com/join. That's right, tyt.com/join. Members, I'll see you there in a minute.